Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Soraya.
All right. Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I am here with Joshua Cutchin.
Greetings.
And the long-lost Red Pill Junkie.
Buenas noches.
You have been missed.
Oh, yeah, I've missed our weekly salon.
It has been a while. I'm not sure exactly how long, but it has been a while since you've been on the show.
Mm-hmm.
People were worried about you.
No, he's serious. Like, there have been YouTube comments asking if you're okay.
Oh, I'm touched by that. I mean, thank you guys. If you were worrying about me. I mean, I guess there's reason for concern. People probably in the United States who have the impression that Mexico is kind of like the Wild West, and there certainly are places in which that is the case. But I'm fairly safe in my neck of the woods. The worst thing that could happen is that someone could steal my phone or something.
No, I think
Right, which has happened before to you.
Yes, twice, unfortunately.
I think people were more afraid of Americans for you than anyone in Mexico.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to, there are two sort of anniversaries, and one is a definite anniversary. The other one kind of confused me a little bit. So Google had popped up just the other day as their logo, the Antikythera Mechanism. And they talked about it like it was the anniversary of it being found. And so I said, well, let's talk a little bit about that for people who don't know anything about it. And then I looked up when it was found, and it was actually found in April of 1900. So I'm thinking, not exactly an anniversary. Like, how many years? 117 in 1 month?
Hooray!
Hooray! So I'm not sure why Google decided that was when they were going to do it, unless they're going on some other information somewhere.
It was probably the one like IT doodle designer was like, guys, I've been asking for the Antikythera Mechanism for like 10 years now. Throw me a bone on some random day, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was for May 17th. Okay, so this is what it says here. May 17th, 115th anniversary of the Antikythera Mechanism's discovery. Okay, so it was actually recovered in 1900. That's what it was.
Mm. And
we're recording this for anyone who wants to know on May 20th, although it'll probably be out later in the week. So May 17th was when it was actually discovered. On this date in 1902, Greek archaeologist Valerios Staeus sifted through some artifacts from a shipwreck at Antikythera. The wrecked Roman cargo ship was discovered 2 years earlier, but Staeus was the first to have noticed an intriguing pit of bronze among the treasures. It looked like it might be a gear or a wheel. That corroded chunk of metal turned out to be part of the Antikythera Mechanism, an ancient analog astronomical computer. So I guess that's why it's the anniversary, but it's the discovery of the shipwreck apparently was in 1900, in April of 1900.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Antikythera Mechanism is one of those things that just really underscores to me, it really blows my mind why people have such a hard time conceptualizing the idea of a advanced civilization somewhere in our past. I mean, it advanced to varying degrees, but like something more advanced than the current narrative holds existed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no reason this should have existed, and there's no argument about the fact of its age or its providence.
Sure, but the fact that
the
machine itself, and this is we call it an astronomical calculator, but if I remember correctly, it could do all sort of things like predict eclipses and also mark when the Olympic games will be celebrated, all sorts of things. You know, it was kind of like a multitasking, or like a computer with several apps, integrated into its machinery.
Yeah, it was designed to monitor celestial events, seasons, and festivals.
But here's the thing one has to keep in mind when discussing the Antikythera mechanism is the fact that this could not have existed in a vacuum. I don't believe this was a prototype or a one-off. This was probably one of at least several machines that were created by someone, and there has to be a provenance. There has to be like a tradition or of lineage or a pedigree behind the mechanism that I don't think we have managed to follow or uncover yet.
Well, and you figure if it took us this long to find this one thing, and there have to be as you said, there have to be other versions of this prior to it. What else is out there that we haven't found?
Mhm.
Like what small spectrum of things are we really trying to judge history off of?
Exactly. Like I mean, what are the odds that we found like the most advanced piece of technology right here with this,
Mm-hmm.
And we only found a piece of one.
Mm-hmm.
So if there had to naturally be others, why haven't we found those? And what else lies out there that, as I think Josh was alluding to, could be more advanced than this? Maybe this wasn't the peak of advancement. This is just the peak that we found.
Yeah, and we also have to keep in mind, that when the mechanism was found, it was exhibited in a Greek museum, and nobody really thought much of it, because to be honest, if you see the early photos of it, it's not that remarkable at first sight.
No.
It's only when you analyze it first through X-ray and then through more sophisticated scanning technologies. Now is I don't know, the magnetic resonance or whatnot, is when you manage to actually realize how intricately, how complex this thing really was. So my point is that there's probably a whole lot of objects out there, maybe some objects that are already part of exhibitions around the world that should deserve further scrutiny, but maybe either there are no the incentive or the technology for it, or maybe just people haven't really figured it out that that wait a minute, you actually have something that is far more interesting and far more valuable than you realize in your hands.
Well, and what I find interesting, well, two things. Have either of you guys seen the recreation that they did with modern technology? They tried to recreate it. It's gorgeous, and it's just it's like it looks super complex. But the other thing is that the fact that this was used for astronomical purposes to keep track of eclipses and stars and whatnot really underscores how important the stars were to ancient man. And I don't mean just like in terms of like they didn't have anything better, so they relied upon the stars for telling them seasons and etc. I mean, like, no, this was a central part of what pre-industrialized cultures do. Is the stars are an integral part of their lives. And it's interesting to me that they would go to this great a length for something that, I mean, this isn't an engine of war. This isn't something that we would expend all of our time and energy and money into. This is something that is just to better understand the movement of planetary bodies, and that to me, I think really indicates where their priorities were.
Yeah, and the fact that
they
were transporting it in this cargo vessel that ultimately suffered a shipwreck. It makes you wonder just how unique it was, because think about it. I mean, this was probably one of the most valuable objects in their time. One of the most valuable objects in the world back in the day. And how is it that they will dare to risk it? By putting it on a sailing boat.
Yeah.
You will think that they will keep it on guard in some temple or in the the castle or of some emperor out there, and yet they put it on a boat. Could it be that?
Unless,
Sorry, could it be that it
go
wasn't
ahead.
really that unique, back in the
Yeah.
day, or I don't know. I mean, you could even construe some really interesting, fantastical story that maybe someone stole it. Someone was stealing it
Mhm.
and taking it to another place for a really high price. Someone could make a really interesting movie out of it.
Well, they do seem to know some information about it. There's a good article on Mental Floss,
Mm,
15 intriguing facts about the Antikythera mechanism.
Mental Floss is great.
yeah.
And it talks about it being found obviously in a Roman era shipwreck, and it's named after the island that it was found right near, Antikythera. It says the first exploration of the wreck killed one diver and paralyzed two others. That was back in 1900. Um, but it says here 3 important Romans may have been involved, and they say that it may have been headed to Rome as part of a triumphal parade for the Emperor Julius Caesar in the 1st century BCE. A related theory is that the ship was carrying booty from the Roman general Sulla's sack of Athens between 87 and 86 BCE. In the same time period, the famous Roman orator Marcus Tullius Cicero mentioned a mechanical planetarium called the Sphere of Archimedes that demonstrated how the sun, moon, and planets moved with respect to the Earth. More recent research, though, suggests the ship may have been en route from Rome to Turkey. The ship's path has been difficult to trace because the Aegean was an important and busy shipping lane at the time. And of course, it says it wasn't recognized as for any idea what it was for 75 years.
Mm-hmm.
We had no
which
idea.
Which really plays into Red's comment about like what else is sitting out there on a dusty shelf that just looks like a hunk of metal that no one really realizes is worth something.
Mm-hmm.
Since all the other artifacts were more apparently worthy of conservation, the mechanism was ignored until 1951. After an additional 2 decades of study, the first publication on the Antikythera mechanism was made in 1974 by physicist and historian Derek de Sola Price. But he didn't figure out how it worked.
Mm.
And he died before figuring that out. I mean, obviously he knew there was something up, but you're dealing with something. If people haven't seen it, it's like almost made of rock at this point, I think. It's because it's so corroded, right. And so it's not like they could just open it up and check out what it is.
A couple thousand years in salt water will do that to you.
Right, exactly. So I think it was when they started doing x-rays is when they started figuring out, what was there. It says the famous marine explorer Jacques Cousteau and his team dived in 1976, and they found some more pieces of it. The museum wasn't terribly impressed, but wrote that the Antikythera mechanism was so entirely different and strange that it is nearly impossible. It is some kind of machine with gear trains, much like the inside of a modern wind-up alarm clock, which is vastly underestimating how complex this thing is.
Yeah, because when you're talking about
I'm sorry, the guy was unimpressed by the museum.
Oh.
I'm sorry. That's better.
Because here's the thing with
until he saw this.
Here's the thing with machines. You can only create complex machinery if you have sophisticated tools to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a sign of the sophistication of a civilization. The more sophisticated the tools, the better the technology they manage to achieve. And this thing is made out of gears, and it's made out of all these wheels, and some of them are really, really tiny. The the perfection in the cogs and the dents in the wheels, uh, shows that. I mean, this wasn't done by rubbing, banging stones. You know what I mean. So it's
Yeah.
this is the way that technology works, especially our technology. Technology is built over later past achievement. If we have computers now, is because 100 years ago we managed to invent the steam engine, and from there we went to from combustion engine, and all of these things, started to build upon that and build upon that and build upon that until you manage to get more and more sophisticated, and you manage to get uh, uh, more complex machinery out of it. I mean, if you were to, for some uh, mental exercise to bring back a computer back to the time of Leonardo da Vinci, maybe the guy you could, entertain the possibility that the guy was so smart that he could have maybe figured it out how the thing worked, but there's no chance in hell he would have managed to reproduce it. He didn't have the technology for it. He didn't have neither the tools nor the materials to try to come up with even, a crude facsimile of a,
Right.
an an Apple computer, or even I don't know, a Rolex timepiece.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's if you think about all of these things, it makes the Antikythera machine even more fantastic and even more interesting.
Yeah, and there are some very tiny inscriptions on there.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe there were people claiming that they couldn't have been made with tools that we know they had at the time, but I'm not sure that was actually the case.
Yeah, whenever you make a criticism like that, you're almost asking to be proven wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, it says technology was so advanced, nothing surpassed it for close to 1,500 years from the rough date that we know. We know the rough date because it was able to be carbon dated because it was in the water. It doesn't tell us how old it was. It tells us, I think, how long it's been in the water.
Mm.
Like when the ship went down. It says it has a built-in instruction manual. Writing on a bronze panel at the back of the mechanism suggests the inventor left either instructions for how to work it or an explanation of what the user was seeing. The inscription, which is in Koine Greek, the most common form of the ancient language, mentions the cycles, dials, and some of the functions of the mechanism. While the text doesn't specifically tell someone how to use it and assumes some amount of prior knowledge of astronomy, it provides written out labels for the person looking at the mechanism.
Mhm.
And they are closing in on where it was made. The festival dial mentions the Olympics in central Greece, the Na in northwest Greece, and the Halea on the island of Rhodes. The latest analysis of the inscriptions suggests that the mechanism could keep track of at least 42 different calendar events. With those dates in mind, Jones and his colleague calculate that the creator of the mechanism was likely based at 35° north latitude. Coupled with Cicero's mention of a similar device at Poseidonus' school, this means that the island of Rhodes is again the leading contender for the origin of the mechanism. And the device told fortunes.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating if they can pin it down to see if there are other, clues around there, because I can't imagine that this was a one-off thing.
There's no way it's a one-off thing. That would be like saying there's one iPhone in existence, and there was nothing before it and
but
nothing after. Someone just went and made an iPhone.
There's one Large Hadron Collider. I mean, you know what I mean?
But that's different. But there are smaller ones too.
True.
There are smaller colliders.
True. Maybe there's a better example I could use.
But all the characteristics of the mechanism and this thing that they have managed to uncover, it also, I feel, tells us that this wasn't made by aliens. This was
Oh no, absolutely.
And I remember the first time that I read about the mechanism was in an ancient aliens, ancient astronaut.
Sure.
But I think it's like straining the imagination to think, that some kind of like extraterrestrial civilization will build something like this, and give them to humans. This is, I don't know. Maybe you could maybe entertain the idea that this was made using knowledge that was gathered from somewhere else, but it was made to create a machine that had a very, you could almost say, petty functions. I mean, like petty for us, although incredibly important for the culture at the time. Like knowing when the Olympic Games will be celebrated, which were of paramount importance to them. You will say the same about, I don't know, the Super Bowl.
Yeah. What was I just going to say about what it also suggests is that there could have been knowledge passed down from it even older. Even though this was made, we generally know when roughly it was made. It doesn't mean that this knowledge originated there. This knowledge could be much older. Who knows how far that knowledge may go back. And again, to jump to, ancient aliens, I think is kind of silly because there's really nothing here that suggests any kind of extraterrestrial origin. But it does suggest a lineage of knowledge going back further than accepted by current timelines.
Yep.
And that's what makes it so important, because you don't get, despite the evidence, you'll still have even Egyptologists dispute the age of the Sphinx. They just ignore the facts, the geological facts on it. But this they don't dispute because you can't.
Yep.
It's an out of place artifact that they literally just can't ignore.
Yeah, you were speaking about Egypt. I remember reading in similar books in which I have first learned about the Antikythera Mechanism, about this weird wooden figurine that was found on the Cairo Museum that was cataloged as a bird, but then some people took a better look at it and they realized that it had perfect aerodynamic features. It looked almost like a glider.
Yeah.
So how do you explain that? Of course, that has is more difficult to defend than the mechanism, because the mechanism has more unique properties, and the other one is, well, it's just a piece of wood shaped in a very interesting way that happens to have really interesting aerodynamic properties. And if you actually see, the thing could fly. But
yes. Well, I think they made a model of it. I think there was one in either South or Central America too that they made a model of, and it flew beautifully.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's not, the equivalent of, and we have sci-fi authors who write about concepts that end up being really sound in terms of their actual basis, and end up sort of being prototypes later down the road. So I wonder if they didn't have similarly, talented visionary people who are like, look, this could work. We don't have the metallurgy to make it work now. But yeah, I think that's sometimes might be the answer for some of this.
Look at Da Vinci. I mean, Da Vinci fits that perfectly.
Yeah, but you're talking about that, for example, when Da Vinci was creating models for a helicopter, and there was a time gap of 500 years, whereas with these artifacts we're talking about thousands of years. So
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah. Oh,
visionary.
yeah. Yeah.
That's a good point. Although I think Da Vinci's helicopter flies like garbage, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't. It doesn't hold up. I don't think.
But
True.
the concept was
Yeah, the
there.
concept is there.
It was
Yeah,
sound.
exactly.
He had the right idea. He may not have had and maybe if he had the technology to try it, he would have gotten it
exactly.
Yeah,
right.
did he have the materials too?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think the Antikythera mechanism is probably one of the most important artifacts of the ancient world, really.
Mhm.
And such an indication of how little we really know. As much as archaeologists and scientists like to say, "Oh no, we know how all this stuff went." They really don't. They have the map of the pieces that they have, but we don't know how many pieces there are.
Yep.
So, all right, well let's move on to the other anniversary, and this is one I know is very much a favorite of you, Red Pill, unless I'm completely wrong
You are
here.
not wrong at all.
But this is this is Fatima, the Blessed Virgin Mary appearing at Fatima, which was, let's see if I can get the exact
May
date here.
13th.
Actually, just was it May 13th?
100 years
Okay.
ago. This past. Oh, geez, was it this past Saturday? Yeah, it's past Saturday.
Yes.
Yes.
Although the events sort of started a year before when the children saw an angel.
That
But,
is
Right.
correct.
Right.
But anyway, I'll step aside now. Finish your thoughts, sir.
Actually, I think we should let Red Pill get into a little. For anyone who's not familiar with Fatima, why don't you explain a little bit about what happened in that field?
That really field in Portugal in 1917. Think about the historical context here, guys. This is a rural place in Portugal, which is largely Catholic, but the government at the time was socialist, I believe, or at least it was very anti-Catholic back in the day, and the Europe was still in the middle of the greatest conflagration seen in the history of man, World War First.
Right.
And so there's these three children, Jacinta and her brother. I don't remember the name of
Was it Francisco?
Francisco, yeah. And then is Lucia, who is their older cousin, and they are they are little shepherds, and they are obviously doing their chores, but probably also playing. And like you said, Joshua, they first had some interesting encounter with an entity that they thought was they judged it to be an angel sent by God.
Right, I think it called itself the Angel of Peace, but that's sort of
an angel of peace.
Yeah, that's sort of a vague.
Yeah,
it's real vague.
yeah, and it's interesting the kind of like rapport that started to happen between the kids and these so-called angel, because the angel will demand of the children to pray the rosary almost incessantly, non-stop for hours or hours, and the children will end up totally exhausted, totally almost like drained of energy. And that this is something that I want to return during this conversation, the idea that there was kind of like a buildup of energy that started to happen very gradually and started with the children. And then the children a year later, like you said, they saw this glowing figure that, according to the original testimony that given by the children and that was kept in the annals of the church, and that Joaquin Fernandez and Fina de Armada managed to read and use for their book Heavenly Lights, which I strongly recommend. If you're interested in this topic, guys, I don't think there's a finer book that you can read than that book. You can purchase it on Amazon, and it's a wonderful read. You will read it in less than a week. It's not a big book, but it's really fascinating. And you see how in the original testimony, the children, or rather, Lucia, described the entity as not the way that has been publicized or promoted by the Catholic Church. The typical Marian apparition.
Right, right.
The woman that is in these typical garments, the typical Marian garments, and clothed in blue clothing. No, the entity was a small figure, like, I don't know, barely 4 feet tall, if I believe correctly. It was completely bald, so it had no hair, and it wore a kind of like a rare garment. It was kind of like a quilted kind of like garment.
Like a tilma, maybe?
Not exactly. It was like a formed out of these kind of like pleated squares, which is kind of weird, And apparently the figure didn't actually move. Yet I think that Lucia said that she managed to understand her perfectly. I think that the other children never actually managed to ever hear her speak. Yet I believe they did manage to see her perfectly. But the interesting thing to consider is that after more people started to go to this place where the apparitions took place, which was this place called Cova da Iria, and Cova means cave in Portuguese, although it's not really a cave, but the fact that it has the name Cova, it kind of like, I think it alludes to kind of like it's some kind of like a depression. It's kind of like a depressed terrain. I believe, maybe I may be wrong, but it has some river nearby, and the existence of of a water source is it's very interesting. It's something that I'm sure
Yes.
Joshua will agree that has a strong linkage and connotations with the faithful tradition.
Yeah, I mean it's there's a lot of strange things about stuff like Fatima, and you're doing a great job of recapping it, so I don't really want to take you too far off the course here, but the fact, I mean, here's a rule of thumb for people. Blessed Virgin Mary apparitions very, very rarely, maybe never, actually refer to themselves as Mary. They're always something really oblique.
Yeah.
In the case of Fatima, she called herself the Lady of the Rosary. There are other examples where they call themselves the Lady of so and so, the Lady of this or that.
Yep.
But not only that, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of similarities between BVM and like the nymphs that you find in a lot of pagan tales in terms of appearing near sources of water, those sort of lights and flashes that you see. And in addition to that sort of vagueness, it almost reads like, running into a water sprite as much as it does something Catholic. So yeah, there's a lot more weirdness with these BVMs than people really want to admit in terms of the official narrative.
Yep.
I am quite on the fence about what these things actually are when they do happen. But interestingly, they're more they're more common than one would think. I mean, in terms of the ones that, well, let me be a little bit more specific there. In terms of the ones that are actually recognized by the Holy Roman Catholic Church, I think there are like 10 Marian apparitions that are actually accepted. But there are plenty of people who say that they see these Blessed Virgin Mary apparitions everywhere. I mean, there was one that happened just up the road in Conyers, Georgia, back in, I think it was the 80s or the 90s. So yeah, they feel they feel a little bit stranger than just a straightforward religious experience.
Yep. And without getting too astray from the main topic, if we talk about exactly, Marian apparitions are not fully recognized by the church. Pope Francis, when he went to Fatima to canonize these two children, Jacinta Francisco, who were the younger ones, who actually died quite young. I think they died like 1 year or 2 years after the apparitions. I think they died because of influenza, the Spanish flu that went rampant across Europe in those days. But he mentioned, I guess he was maybe asked by the press about the other apparitions, like for example in Medjugorje, in the former what's the name of this country? Yugoslavia, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
What is now Bosnia and Herzegovina. And what he said was very interesting and telling, because he said that he believed that the first apparitions that I feel started to happen in the early 1980s. He believed that they deserved further scrutiny, but he was much more skeptic about the later ones, especially the ones that are apparently still happening today. Which is telling, because I think this is something that the Catholic Church encounters or has to deal with when trying to judge this kind of phenomena, because they tend to deviate highly from the typical doctrine that they're trying to defend. In the end, you see that organized religions are not comfortable with common people having transcendental experiences and encounters with the divine, because at the end of the day they want to remain the gatekeepers of the religious experience. They really are not comfortable when those kind of experiences happen without them being mediated. That's why I believe that sometimes they don't have any choice but to try to circle around and try to jump and manage the narrative from those encounters. And I believe that's what they did once the Fatima apparitions became so incredibly popular, especially after what happened after the main event we happened in October the 13th, 1917, when thousands of people watched a really interesting event. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because we were still discussing the early apparitions, and when the children, I believe, started to disclose what they were seeing to their parents, and I guess their parents, they really weren't believing their stories, but I guess
right.
Rural towns being what they are, got word, get carried away, and suddenly people learned of what was happening at Cova de area, and curious people started to go there, and although they didn't actually manage to see the entity, the so-called Lady of the Rosary. People describe other really interesting things too. Things like celestial visions, orbs of light and whatnot. And also, and it is really interesting, they will see that when Lucia apparently was in communication with the entity, they would the parishioners would report perceiving a sound like the buzzing of bees. And this is something that Joaquin Fernandez and Fina de Armanda were really very interested on that in their book, and they discussed it at length because, according to them, that kind of phenomena is not unlike what happens when I believe it was maybe the army, the U.S. Army, when they conducted experiments with microwaves and trying to direct a beam of microwaves directly to the head of a test subject in order to try to, I don't know, send a cone of microwave radiation directly to the head of a person, and the test subject will report a similar buzzing sound. So they would, the authors speculated that maybe this was a sign that there was some kind of like technology being used in order to send information that was only intelligible to Lucia, while the rest of the people maybe they weren't, at the right approach, or something was happening with their physiology that they will only, perceive that information or that communication as a buzzing sound.
Yeah, and that
and of course,
I think we're going to say the same thing. So you guys try.
that of course is also a common feature in UFO
and
reports.
psychedelic encounters as well, or psychedelic trips as well.
Mm-hmm. And from Kundalini.
Mm-hmm. And that I didn't know.
Yep, buzzing is very common.
Yeah, Greg Taylor, who is one of my mentors, and who is the main manager of the Daily Grail, he wrote a fascinating essay called Her Sweet Murmur, in which he explored all these sounds that are reported during, transcendental mystical experiences, and he discussed also, this buzzing sound that was reported during the Fatima apparitions. I think you can find that essay freely online if you go to the Daily Grail page or the Dark Lore webpage. Dark Lore is the yearly anthology that Greg releases under the Daily Grail Publishing Company. So, try to check it out, and I think you can find more information about Fatima and other cases in which strange buzzing sound, like whirlwind sounds, are reported by witnesses.
Yeah, that's something that I've been wondering about for a while. I even thought about doing a book, a sound book, because that's one of those things that has been always really, really consistent, is that sort of strange buzzing sound. That and the exact opposite, the Oz effect too.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Should we continue discussing what happened?
Yes.
Is it Miracle of the Sun time?
No, maybe we can go and talk how I think the bishop of the parish of the town where the kids live, when he learned about it, he actually kidnapped the kids. He the guy held the kids in custody.
Yeah, there was a provincial administrator who did that. Who I think he ended up throwing them in. He jailed them, I think.
You're right. He wasn't a religious figure. It was, I think, either the mayor of the town,
civil servant. Yeah, civil servant kind of thing.
Yeah, because, like I said, Portugal back in the day, the government was completely anti-church, anti-clerical, I guess it's the word for it. So they were really not in the mood to try to entertain the peasants, to having all these, stupid religious fantasies. But people still went to cover the area, despite the fact that the children weren't present. They went there anyway, and they saw something. They saw, I think, these orbs of light and other kind of thing. I think that in the Fatima apparitions, this phenomena that we call angel hair was also reported.
Oh, I didn't know that. Nice.
I believe so. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the Fernandez and Armada, they talk about how what people reported, how they were trying to get a hold of this thing that was falling from the sky, and obviously it will dissolve before their eyes, just as they were touching their skin. But then I guess the mayor had no choice but to release the kids, and I believe that's when we reach the famous date of October the 13th, when the dancing of the sun occurred, which was the main and final miracle, if you want to call it like that. And that's when, I believe people say it was 5,000 people who were present.
Oh, I've heard that I've heard numbers from like as high as 100,000, like 30 to 100,000 people. Because apparently it was seen like in other countries too. Like I believe that there were people at the Vatican who claimed that they could see it.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, neither did I.
But anyway, sorry. There I go, stepping on you again. I'm sorry, man.
No. This, I mean, it's not only myself who should be talking about that, but yeah, thousands of people went there, and not only believers, the skeptics and atheists went there because they wanted to have a chance to make fun of the superstitious peasants once nothing happened, right? The thing is that something apparently did happen, something really, really interesting. Apparently, it had rained constantly all that morning, but then the clouds broke, and something like a luminous disc or a silver disc came out of the clouds, which people thought it was the sun, but apparently it was some kind of like an object that took the place of the sun. And this giant object started to make these kind of like weird movements that some authors have tried to link to the movements that are reported in other ufological events. The typical falling leaf movement,
Right.
Up and down in a swinging motion, and then the object, once it almost touched the ground, will move back up. And obviously, even if for people in 1917, even people in 2017, if you saw something like that, you will probably be completely flabbergasted.
Yeah, that's a big drone, you guys.
Exactly. I mean, people were falling on their knees, like crossing themselves and praying. Even people who were, hardcore atheists started to repent of their sins because they were certain that the end of the world was, at night. But and this is the interesting thing about it. This is the thing that I learned when I read this book, Heavenly Light. You read the testimony of all the people who reported what they saw to the church, and the reports are all different. You know,
Yeah.
nobody saw or nobody reported the so-called miracle of the sun in exactly the same way. Like some people reported that the disc had like a whitish coloration. Other people saw that the thing was actually kind of like bluish. Other people said it was greenish or that it would change colors. That to me speaks about how this phenomenon, whether it has an objective reality or not, it is perceived differently by people depending on something. Maybe it's our physiology, or maybe it's something that has to do with uh, our psychology or expectations. But this is something that I believe deserves further scrutiny, because I believe it hints to the things that Greg Bishop have tried has tried to come up with when he has discussed his co-creation theory.
Well, I know one of the more recent times that Jeff Ritzman was on. I don't remember who it was with, but we were talking about the Google blimp that was cited as UFO, and how all the reports were pretty much the same, and then it turned out to be something that people had just not seen before. And I use that as an example of people do actually report accurately what they're seeing. You didn't get this spate of weird reports that were all different. Um, and that's important because we were able to find out what it was and find out that those reports were generally very accurate. And Jeff mentioned that, with some of these type of things, with UFO encounters and so on and so forth, what's interesting is the reports are not similar. And that's an easy point for skeptics to dismiss and say, well, look, all these reports are different. But maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the way you tell whether or not this is a known object or something really unusual, is if you have a bunch of people who are all seeing different things.
What I've heard um, about people who have a background in police work is that whenever you have some kind of like event, like mass event, like an accident or something, or maybe a robbery, you have a good group of witnesses. To them, it is kind of like a rule of thumb that when the witnesses have all kind of like conflicting testimonies, that means they're being honest. When you find two or three
Right.
witnesses that tell the same story, that raises the red flags, because that to them is a sign of confabulation.
Yeah,
That
it's
these
a
guys,
prearranged story. Yeah.
exactly, they're telling the same story for a reason. So that is something that those skeptics should keep in mind when dismissing an event just because you apparently have conflicting testimonies.
Okay. That's true. That's true. But I think too, in those events like accidents, the brain doesn't quite record data the same way because it's in a more traumatic state. The adrenaline's pumping. The brain doesn't form memories quite the same
And do you
way.
feel that watching the sun coming down to Earth wouldn't be as traumatic or more
Oh,
traumatic than a car crash?
certainly it would. I'm just saying that not all paranormal events are quite like that.
Yeah,
When you get people who see very different things like that, it might also it's hard to determine whether it's an aspect of the phenomena or the
exactly.
brain, or if it's just a perception thing.
Yeah, it's the big wondering. But
Hmm.
anyway, with Fatima, there are other things to consider. There's okay, the apparitions that we have tried to describe very poorly, I feel, and there's also the thing about the secrets, the three
Yes.
secrets that were allegedly imparted by this entity to Lucia. And Lucia, at the time was illiterate. She didn't know how to read or write. She learned later, when she became a nun, forced to become a nun, actually, but we'll get back to that. And two of the secrets were known pretty much after the apparitions became famous worldwide. Why? The first one is apparently a description of what Lucia saw, which she felt was like a vision of hell, of souls in eternal damnation, which to me as a former Catholic is something that disturbs me because I no longer believe in a supreme being that would take pleasure or would even condone for the eternal torment of its creatures. No matter the kind of like actions or deeds they would, do during their lifetimes. But maybe this speaks about once again how the phenomenon conforms to our expectations, and this Lucia was a child who was living in a Catholic country, was raised a Catholic, and was, you know, was taught to believe in a certain doctrine, a doctrine about, sin and punishment for sins and that kind of things. So maybe that is something that relates to that. The
Right,
second,
and at this point, all the children had become like uncharacteristically devout for someone their age. I mean, they were self-flagellating and they were fasting and they were it makes sense that they would be in that sort of headspace to be in that sort of in the sort of headspace where they would have something that traditionally dogmatically Catholic revealed to them.
sure. Although maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there is something that we could call hell. That's just some kind of like lower realm of consciousness in which
The
some
lower
people,
vibration.
yeah, who knows, let's not close the door on that, just because it doesn't appeal to our the libertarian or progressive sensibilities. But then there's the second secret in which it seems to be a prediction that the First World War will come to a near end. The war in Europe, I think it ended in 1918, if I'm not mistaken. So it was very accurate, that prediction. But then the entity said that if Russia didn't convert, and Russia back then was already a Soviet country, the Bolshevik Revolution had already taken place. So this entity warned that if Russia didn't convert to the Virgin Sacred Heart, a second war will strike Europe, which will be even worse than the one that was already taking place. And obviously, in retrospect, that seems like a really frightening prophecy, because it seems that it really took place.
And then so the three secrets: hell, World War II, and then the
third one, yeah.
assassination. Yeah, the third one was the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, right?
Was that actually confirmed?
Well,
That
that's
is not,
the thing.
that's the thing.
There's
Because
there's plenty of conspiracies about that, and some believe that's not what the secret was about either. It's never completely come out.
yeah, because the third secret, yeah, exactly, it was the elephant in the room. It wasn't disclosed by the church, even though that Lucia said that the Virgin ordered it to be, released. But there was all these rumors and legends, that when popes learned of the secret, they will faint and they will cry and despair and they will, refuse to make it public. Some people will say, well, surely the secret has to do with a nuclear war or some catastrophe, the apocalypse, whatever. And some people, start to say, well, maybe it has something to do with the church itself. And then I don't remember what year it was, but it was definitely in the last years of the reign of John Paul II, who was a really interesting pope, very progressive in some ways and very backward in others. Was born Karol Wojtyla from Poland, which was still under the grip of the Soviet Union in the Iron Curtain. And not long after he became a pope, he went to Fatima. And no, I'm saying it wrong. Not long after he became a pope, someone attempted on his life, and that someone was a Turkish fanatic by the name of Mehmet Ali Akka. So this guy fired upon Pope John Paul II. He wounded him almost mortally, but the Pope didn't die. And he believed through the remainder of his life that somehow the Virgin of Fatima had saved his life and somehow deflected the bullet. In fact, once the bullet was removed from his chest, he donated the bullet and was, right now is placed upon the altar of the Virgin in the Church of Fatima. And then years later, apparently he ordered the release of the third secret, which is kind of like a really surrealist vision. It's a vision of some kind of like a white bishop, which is atop of a mountain that is covered in bodies or something, and then is being attacked by arrows or something like that, and is wounded or killed. So it is so ambiguous and so difficult to pinpoint that, like many of these kind of religious prophecies, or like the prophecies of Nostradamus, it can be construed either way. You can see it as confirmation that the Pope would be shot, or maybe that he was supposed to die, although he wasn't. So maybe you could say that's when there was some kind of divine intervention to save his life, and in the end changed the course of history, as we can talk about right after this. And or some people have alluded that the secret is actually not about the attempt on John Paul's life, but it refers to the end of the church itself. How the church will be attacked on several fronts, and it would ultimately die. And this kind of like some people have linked that to the prophecies of these other religious prophecies. What's the name of this guy? The prophecies that talk about the last popes. Help me out, Joshua.
Oh, I know who you're.
Yeah, I got nothing.
Malachi or something like that.
Malachi Martin? No, not Malachi.
I don't know. No, I think it starts with M, but the ones that talk about the last pope, the black pope, and then
right.
The return of Peter, and then after that it's supposed to be the last judgment. Sorry for not remembering that, folks. But anyway, so those are the three secrets.
Saint Malachi.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't use Google at all for that, folks.
So those are the three secrets, right? And the third one is still mired in controversy. And like we said, the the, the two youngest witnesses of Fatima died very young due to natural causes, uh, although they were the last to be canonized. And then there's Lucia, the older one, the one that survived, the one that had actually received the messages, who had actually communicated with, the alleged Virgin Mary, and she entered the convent not long after that. Some people say that the church forced her to become a nun, and she spent the remainder of her life in seclusion. She only uh, talked to a handful of people about what she experienced as a child, on very limited occasions. She received a visit from John Paul II after he survived the attack on his life. You know, the- anyone who tried to approach her had to pass the scrutiny of the Catholic Church. Some people will even claim that she was kind of like almost like a prisoner of the church. You know,
Yeah, I'm not even sure how many photos exist of her after
very
she
few.
was a kid. But this sort of seclusion is one of the reasons that people have thought that perhaps the church actually replaced her with an imposter. Um, supposedly,
Really?
supposedly as an imposter to keep the third secret from being revealed. So they'd be like, "Oh, look, one of the original kids doesn't want the secret to be revealed. Let's keep this under wraps." That's sort of one of a couple of different conspiracy theories revolving around her and the fact that she was, so secluded.
Well, what I heard, is that the reason of her seclusion is because the church didn't want the third secret to come out. So I guess she, being like the only human being alive who had actually heard it or know it, aside from those documents that were kept by the church, uh, sealed in the Vatican, archives. Uh, I tend to lean that that was probably the reason why the church decided to keep her so isolated. But here's another interesting tidbit. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chica Bruce.
No, I don't
Alex.
think so.
Okay, so Alexandra Chica Bruce was actually she was born in Brazil, so she speaks both English and Portuguese, and she was the one who actually translated the book written by Fernandez and Dormada. And she has had her fair share of paranormal experiences. Very interesting. You can find out more about those if you do a bit of search on Google. You just try to find the old archives of Adam Gorightly's Untamed Dimensions podcast. So there's an interview he had with her in which she speaks about those experiences, and she also speaks about how when she was in the middle of translating this book about the Virgin of Fatima, not long after that, Lucia passed away, and Chica claims that there was a time when she kind of like felt that there was kind of like a telepathic transmission between she and Lucia. Like somehow she felt that she was experiencing or feeling what Lucia was feeling during the last moments of her life. This feeling of she feeling this level of like self-importance because she had been the chosen one, right? The one that the mother of God had talked to her and only to her. So there was this kind of like
Yeah.
uh, I don't want to say arrogance, but this kind of like pride that that apparently she maintained until the end. Well, if you believe that what Chica experienced wasn't actually something that came from Lucia, or maybe she was just, some kind of like mental projection that happened by the fact that had- that Chica had been working on this manuscript and been thinking about all these things for so long. But nonetheless, I find that to be interesting, and it raises the question of what did Lucia think of herself. I mean, she had her whole life, more than 70 years, to think about what happened to her, when she was still a child.
Well, and an interesting thing about Lucia is that she had apparitions during her life as a nun too. I don't know if you knew that, but
I didn't.
the Ponte Vedra apparitions is what they were called. And I believe it was. I don't think it was either 2 or 3. It wasn't that many, but uh, the first one, Mary told her that if people would go to confession for five first Saturdays in a row, that she would help grant them access into heaven. And then there was a second. There was a second. There was a second apparition, or second and a third one that weren't as important, but that was the big one that sort of really took root in Catholic tradition. So it almost makes you wonder if she was sort of the catalyst for these other kids to have seen that.
Interesting. And once again, we find this idea that of these entities demanding something. They want something out of the witnesses, and they want some kind of like message to be transmitted. So the same thing that happened
Right.
with the Virgin of Guadalupe. This apparition that is encountered by these indigenous peasants by the name of Juan Diego, and this sent out to deliver a message to uh, Archbishop Fray Juan de Zumárraga, that the Virgin Mary wants a temple to be built on the Mount of Tepeyac. The same thing. Here we have the Virgin demanding people to pray the Rosary or to repent, to do something, and once again, I want to get back to this what happened before the Marian apparitions, with the angel demanding the children to not only to repent but to
Yes.
pray the Rosary and to all this psychic energy that was being like maybe gathered by some kind of like intelligence that was gradually building up, from May the 13th to October the 13th, when there was a final crisis. I've always wondered, Soraya and Joshua, whether the final event of the miracle of the dancing of the sun, if it could have happened prior to October the 13th, or whether it needed all the previous building up of energy of all the people who started to gradually go and make the pilgrimage to go other area.
A giant
First a
psychic
couple of
battery.
dozens. Yeah, exactly. First a couple of dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. All those people with all those expectations, and maybe there's the phenomenon building up, like you said, out of all that human energy.
Well, what I want to know is something that sort of trying to look at patterns in this, is that you see the 13th of the month showing up so often. I mean, the original, so we just talked about May 13th being the first apparition of Our Lady, but then like There were other events on the 13th of, I think it was June, and we had just said that, October 13th was the Miracle of the Sun. It was almost like there was something about this, Lucky 13 going on, too.
Well, it may. You also have Keel's analysis that around the middle of the month is when you have the most UFO encounters. I think between like the 13th and the 23rd or something
That's
like
true.
that.
That's true. I hadn't thought of that. That's a really good point.
I would like to know if May 13, 1917, I wonder if it was a Wednesday.
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing too. But I mean, like, the middle of the month is sort of a Wednesday writ large, right? It's the middle of the month versus the middle of the week. In case anybody's wondering, there's the Wednesday effect, which I think it was Valet, right? Valet pointed out that
it
I
might have been
think it was
Keel.
Keel. Yeah, it was Keel.
Ooh, okay. That UFO sightings were more likely on Wednesdays, or anomalous things were more likely to happen on Wednesdays.
Yeah.
And if you read your Evans Wentz, very folk in Celtic countries, you see that the Fae were, very fond of making their trickstery apparitions on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, but for some reason they were really adverse to Thursday and Fridays and the rest of the week.
Yeah.
And why would these things care? And May 13th, 1917 was a
So that's what I was just looking up. I was just frantically Googling that over here. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what that implies is it implies that they care about our social constructs, right? Whatever this other is cares about our social constructs.
And why would that be?
Or I don't know, maybe there's some kind of coding or some kind of mathematical, rules that the phenomenon has to follow, the whole thing with the name game and all, because think about it also, Fatima is actually it's an Arabic name, it harkens back to the time when Portugal, as part of Spain, was under the yoke of the Muslim invaders that kept had invaded Spain and kept them under their domain for 8 centuries, and the fact that Aliaga, when he attempted on John Paul's life, and let's not forget that there's all these conspiracy theories surrounding that event. Some people think that he was a lone wolf, a deranged guy, which is, very possible. But there's also people who think that he was being a puppet under the being guided by either the KGB or even the CIA, that were trying to kill the Pope, maybe in order to try to, kickstart a certain series of events, for their own benefit. But getting back to Aliaga, one he gave a number of interviews when he was in jail. He was this guy, very fundamentalist, scatological fanatic who believed that the end of the world was, going to happen within a generation. And also, he believed that the entity that had appeared on Covadeiria in Portugal in 1917 wasn't the Virgin Mary, wasn't the mother of Jesus Christ, but was Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. So you see, this story is not a simple one, folks. It's incredibly complex. That's probably the reason why I love it so much.
And what strikes me about that third prophecy is that Mary, if I'm not mistaken, wanted it announced, and the church decided, well, we're not going to announce it. And it's like, so the church authority outweighs that of the Blessed Virgin Mary?
Yeah, well, they're always trying to, like I said, keep the grip on the narrative, and that's why now the current Pope Francis, he says, well, I don't like the idea of Mary, the Mother of God, being this like daily messenger, you know, because of the apparitions in Medjugorje. There's there's they're still receiving messages allegedly from this Marian apparition, but they don't like that. They don't like all these narratives that are not sanctioned, are not following the canon of the Catholic Church. They prefer to control the narrative. They prefer to control the canon. They really
Yeah.
don't
Well,
like,
sure. It's power.
exactly. They really don't like when there's something that falls out of their control.
Hmm. All right. Well, I don't know what else to do with this. It seems like we could spend like the next 5 hours discussing the different repercussions.
Yeah,
of
this
all
is
of
this is a rabbit hole that you could make the Fatima apparitions just your thing and just keep on going and going and going. I feel like.
Yep.
I was always fascinated by Valet's, comparisons to the UFO phenomena, and I think it was you, Josh, that pointed out the similarity of when I had the experience with the moon shaking.
Yeah, it's real similar to that in terms of just like a heavenly body doing its thing. I think we talked about that a couple weeks ago. I think Valet has been on the record as saying that the miracle of the sun is like the most important ufological event of the 20th century. Which in a community that reveres Roswell, them's fighting words, but I'm all behind it.
One last thing that
well, there's more. So, if you look at Roswell and you look at that, there's most of Roswell is very circumstantial. It's very unsubstantiated, and I'm sure there's going to be people who wholly disagree with me on that. But when you look at Fatima, there's not really a lot of arguments that something happened there that was very unusual.
Yeah.
Whereas you can find people, with Roswell who will say, "Oh no, this is what happened and that's what happened," and then someone else is saying, "No, this is what happened and that's what happened," because we have bits and pieces that something unusual happened there, but whether it was paranormal or um, a secret, military thing or whatever, it there's not enough information to really truly flesh it out, I don't think. And the waters have been so muddied that we'll never get to the bottom of it.
Well, and what if? I mean, the thing about Roswell is that there's 100 other more mundane explanations that are possible, and by mundane I mean
Right.
I mean still pretty wild, but earthly explanations. But with the miracle of the sun, there ain't a lot that it could be unless it's something truly anomalous.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, like I said before, the dance of the sun, the people there, were drenched because of the rain that had poured before that. But it is claimed that afterward, everybody had their clothes dried. So that explains about some physical manifestation. There wasn't, just some kind of like psychological mass hallucination going on there. But the problem now is, and this speaks about the self-negating nature of the phenomenon. There doesn't seem to be something more as a kind of like evidence of this phenomenon outside of the testimony of the people who witnessed it. And I know that if you Google, Fatima Miracle of the Sun, you can find an interesting black and white picture that allegedly depicts like the actual, disc that was seen, during the event. But I believe, I think it was Ballet, or I don't know who, they have said that that's actually a hoax, or it's not related to the event itself. So it's interesting. We have thousands of people who witnessed this, and I believe there were even people who have cameras with them, but we don't have a single actual image of the event itself. There are images of people who seems to be witnessing something in the sky. I don't know if that's a recreation or something that someone a picture someone took before the actual event. But there you have it. That once again, this super important phenomenon is still, away from being, like a case closed, 100% certain, proof of supernatural intervention.
Yeah, I dare say that it's the largest body of witnesses. Even if it's the smaller estimation at 5,000, it's got to be the largest body of witnesses to a supernatural event in modern history.
Mm-hmm. And one last thing that I would like to bring to the table is I really wish that Michael would have been able to join us, because something that I seem to have noticed about the Fatima events and other interesting events related to the church, it seems to be somehow connected to the astrological planet Uranus. Somehow it seems that in astrology, Uranus is akin to change, to deep spiritual transformation. And I don't know, for I remember reading the books by Fernand Sandor-Armada, and they somehow talked about the entities that manifested in Fatima as, Uranians. And I remember once writing a really weird and really wild blog post when Pope Francis was, uh, anointed, to be the head of the church. Somehow it seemed to allude once again to the planet Uranus, because I believe that that day was the anniversary of the discovery of the planet Uranus. So I don't know. I wish Michael could, be here to try to, bring his expertise about that, and how that in astrology could be connected to all these events.
Interesting. Yeah, Mike was originally going to join us, and then he turned out he could not.
We always miss Mike whenever we can't have Mike.
Yeah, true.
True. But we've had Mike more recently than Red Pill Junkie.
That's true.
So let's hope that changes now. And any last words on this, guys?
No. Happy centennial, Fatima.
Wondering when the next Fatima will take place, if something like that can ever take place again.
All right. Well, thank you guys. It's been a great discussion.
Absolute pleasure.
Fantastic.